the church community, and as a fellowship here. And so we're going to get into the Word here, into the New Testament here a little bit. But before we begin, if you would just join me in prayer again. Father God, I thank you so much for the opportunity to gather here in your house, Lord, and to worship you and to praise you, Lord, with our songs, with our hearts, with who we are. I thank you, Lord, for all those that are gathered here in fellowship together. I thank you that we live in a country where this is something we can do freely and openly. And Father, as I go into this message, I just pray that you give me the words that you want spoken. Open our hearts and open our ears to hear this message, Lord. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen.
Well, I'm going to start off with Ephesians 2:14. Ephesians 2:14 says, "For he himself is our peace, who has made the two groups one and has destroyed the barrier, dividing the wall of hostility." And at that point in time, the Bible's talking about Gentiles and Jews. What is the church? Why are we here? What is the church? We have to take that into consideration. It's very easy for us to start saying that the church is just simply a building or a place we go on Sunday. But it needs to be more than that. And it was more than that in the New Testament. We need to look at that. Jesus' sacrifice allows us to live in a community with one another, something that had not happened before this. His sacrifice opened that up for us. Our lives as Christians should be built on the principles of Christ, where we accept each other. We accept anyone. Jesus was very good at that. He accepted everybody. Now, right now in the world, you could say that we're more connected than we ever have been before. I can see the news from any place in the world if I want to. I go online and I type it in and I can see whatever news I want. Teaching geography class, and we go to the Canadian Broadcasting Company, and then you search by province, and they can go in there and we can find out what's happening in the Yukon today. We have social media and cell phones and Facebook and all these different things that we can use to kind of connect with people. But I think today we're as disconnected as we've ever been too. While we may be able to find out things, we still don't have the connections that we may have had before. Now this last weekend I think is when it started, I did one of my typical boneheaded moves. My cell phone had gotten to the point where the battery lasted about 20 minutes. So I went on YouTube and I looked at it, and I went online, and for 25 bucks you can buy a battery and the little toolkit, whole 9 yards. And of course I tore it apart and the power was awesome, but I lost everything else. I can't use that phone at all. So I was without a phone for a while. I ordered another used one, and it's working great. But I was without a phone for a while, and we realized how dependent we are on that phone. We had a second phone. Jane's got a phone, and then we had would have been a third phone that we use for Megan when she goes to away basketball game. She can call us and tell us when she's getting close. We can pick her up, things like that. And then the horses got out one day. They had been lifting on the gate and got Jane loose, and they got out one night actually. Jane was going to pick Megan up from a basketball game at 9:30 at night. She noticed the horses were out. Of course, I drove all over the place, and in the dark, you can't find nothing. Next morning, they're out there, and we got them in. Jane went out there and opened the back gate up just as I'm leaving to take the kids to school. I went around one side of the cow lot where they were, and they came around and followed her right in. I drove around the other end and shut the gate again because we had the front gate open, thinking maybe they'd come that way. So I went up there and shut the gate, and we're all praising God and celebrating. And I get home that night, and I don't have a phone, so she didn't call me. I get home that night, and apparently in the excitement of getting them in, she forgot to shut the back gate again. So that afternoon they were out again. So needless to say, we're out of horse treats, we're out of all that kind of stuff. And in the process of chasing them in, she fell down once, and somewhere out there we planted a cell phone tree. Her cell phone was out in the field somewhere, now we can't find out. We get really dependent upon those cell phones. When the weather got kind of nasty here, the other night I'm coming home with the kids after Megan's got a late practice Wednesday night or something like that. and the weather was terrible, and we're coming home. Jane's just pins and needles because she can't get a hold of us and find out how we're doing and everything. It's just, we have become that way. As a kid, we never had that. And we didn't know what we were missing at the time, I guess, because it never bothered anybody. You said you would be home at such and such a time, and you just kind of did. I mean, we had a party line. All the neighbors knew when you were coming home. But we didn't have this connection that we have here. But while we do have that connection, it's also allowing ourselves to isolate ourselves from people. You send somebody a Facebook message instead of a letter. Instead of calling them and talking to them, you just send them an email. We're losing that face-to-face, one-on-one contact. And the challenge with that, of course, is that you may have 1,000 likes on a Facebook post, but not talk to anybody all day. That isolationism is terrible. They did a study with college-age students, and they took away all social media for a week from college students. And at the end of them, like 90% or something close to that were clinically depressed at the end of that week. Now, why would you be clinically depressed from not having a cell phone? It's because that was their only contact with people. And when they didn't have a cell phone, they didn't know any other way to contact people. They couldn't figure out how to just go talk to somebody. Or just get on a phone and call someone up. Without the cell phone and without the social media, they felt isolated. Well, the church is not meant to be like that because God created us for community. God created us to be together as a group, as fellow believers in Christ. We are gathered to be in a community, in a deep relationship. Life is not meant to be lived alone. We are not meant to be alone. It's very rare that you would ever find someone who's truly alone and truly happy. It just doesn't happen. Now, there are times when being separated, that's one thing. Sometimes we need the quiet time, but being that way all the time is not going to work. It's not going to work for the human condition. It's not going to work for who we are. Our best shot at living for Jesus and making it through all the storms in life is community. It's getting together and having people that you share your heart with. We need to do that. We need to do that actively. We need to kind of do life together. We need to actively pursue that. We need to aim for that. That should be our goal. That should be our aim in our community, in our fellowship, in our relationships, and in our church, is that we spend that time in relationship with each other and communion with each other. Sometimes it's hard to do. You may not know how to get into those relationships. Well, I've always felt a little envious of the Wall family. Having all those generations living within rock throwing distance of each other. That's an awesome thing. That's an awesome thing. I would love to have that opportunity. And we moved out to South Dakota and kind of left all of our blood relation behind. There's nobody else out here. And trust me, every time we go back, we're reminded of that. My mother says, you kept my grandkids from me your whole life. I see my grandkids once a year. But that community, that relationship that we have goes beyond family too. And we need to understand that even if we don't know how, if we aim for it, we'll find it. Even if you don't know for sure how to get into that relationship, if you leave yourself open to it, it happens. One of the reasons we came here was because of the welcome feeling that we had within this church. When I was coming up here, I loved it, and I would express it to Jane. And then some things happened, and Jane came up with me on a regular basis, and she felt it too. We felt that openness here. We felt that connection here. I think a lot of people do. The problem that we have is while we have that connection, we also hold ourselves at arm's length from people. We have that feeling. We may be welcoming each other, but there's still that little bit of disconnect, that little bit of hold off. Now, there's a lot of reasons for it. Life is busy. Life is very busy. We got a lot of things going on. We got stuff going on all the time. The weeks right now just absolutely fly by. Between things that are going on at work and and Megan doing the basketball thing, and all this other stuff going on. It seems like we're just running crazy all the time. We run a lot. We had a lady in our old church, down in Glendale, who's just a really dear friend of us, and she and Jane are constantly exchanging letters, and she had the same situation. They have their farm, and they live in the house that her in-laws lived in, and they have 3 boys, and all 3 boys live on the place right there. Some of them work other places, but they all live right there with them. But she has this tiny little house. I doubt her house is as big as the sanctuary here. I very, very much doubt that it's this big. But she constantly has people over. She has a blessing and spiritual gift for hospitality. She always has people at her house. Relatives coming from all over the place, Louisiana, South Carolina, friends from here, friends from there. She's always got someone in her house. That woman knows how to cultivate those relationships because they want to come to her house and spend time. That's a blessing. But it's not something we're all good at. Sometimes we're just so busy that we really take the time to stop and look at what we need and not what we want or what's just around us. If we cut out the white noise and look at what's really deep in our hearts, that's where that loneliness ends and that relationship begins. And on top of busyness, we got all sorts of other things going on where we may be feeling like we're not safe. We're not safe in a relationship. Maybe it's a fear of that connection. Maybe it's a fear of if people really know who I am, they won't like me. So I'll hide that part of it. Yeah, I was thinking of this when I was writing through this, and I remember, and I would imagine just about everybody's had this experience. I remember my mom could be at the top of her lungs, just laying into us, and the phone would ring. And she would say, hello. She had a switch she could flip just like that. And people on the other end of the line had no idea what was going on at the time because she could flip that switch. Which I admire that. I heard a commercial, one of those Mormon commercials on the way home yesterday on the radio, and it was a father talking to his daughter. She just got in a car accident. And he's got this really hoarse voice, and he's saying, well, so you backed into him? Yeah. A lot of damage on the car? Oh, yeah, there's a lot of damage. How about his? Oh, it's worse than ours. And he's going through this. He said, well, is everybody okay? Yeah. And she said, Dad, how come your voice is so rough? He said, well, right away when you called me, I went in the bathroom, and I've been yelling for the last 20 minutes to get it out of my system so it wouldn't yell at you. That's a good lesson. When we look at why we don't have relationships, why we're not close, sometimes it's a fear. It's a fear of intimacy, a fear of being close to someone. And the church has to be a safe place. We have to recognize who we are. Okay? Jesus surrounded himself with all the outcasts. He surrounded himself with the sinners. He surrounded himself with the people that nobody else would have invited into their house. He said, I'm coming to your house for supper. He sat around with the tax collectors. He went to the people that needed him the most, but society would have thought were the least. He accepted everyone that way. Go ahead, Pete. Luke 5:32, I've not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. That's who Jesus called. And we have to remember in our own lives who we are. We are sinners saved by grace. We are no better than anyone else. There's nothing about us that makes us special except him. There's nothing whatsoever that we have that we did not get through him. So if someone were to come to us, we can't reject anyone because we're no better than they are. We can't separate ourselves from other people because that's exactly the opposite of what Christ did. It's very dangerous, and it's an unfortunate reality, I think, in the Christian church today. It's very dangerous for us to start separating ourselves and classifying ourselves and saying there's us and then there's them. This building, this church, to be a place of sanctuary where people walk in here because they're heartbroken and they don't know where else to go, and they should be able to walk in that door and know that they are safe when they come in there. It should be a place where I don't care what your race is, what your station in life is, what your age is, what your needs are. It does not matter. You should be able to walk into this building feeling safe. And while I say that, there are yet people that can come into the church, that could come into a church every Sunday and still not feel safe enough to open their hearts up and share their pain, share their needs. They're still unsure. While they could be here and be present, they may still be afraid. And that's a sad thing. That's a sad thing in the church, that we cannot be open enough with each other to share when there's something that's really hurting. There is nothing greater than being able to trust someone with the biggest burdens in your life. Whether that's a sin burden, whether it's a need for accountability, whether that's something that you're going through right now. When Jane and I lost Maggie, if it hadn't been for the church, I don't think we would have made it. I really don't. But I've been on the other end of that too, where other people have lost or gone through traumatic events. We had a family that were occasional church goers down there, and the father shot the mother. 6 kids, young kids. And the church immediately wrapped our arms around the kids. We had them in a hotel in Pier, and we're taking care of them down there. And the church really came together in that circumstance. Unexpected, way unexpected. Not something anybody would have even imagined happened. Absolutely horrible tragedy. But it didn't take 2 minutes and the church was involved. And I remember, we've been going to that church for a while, and I remember I was riding home with one of the other guys, and he said, I know we've known each other for a long time, but he said, this is the first time I think that we've all opened ourselves up enough that we saw each other for who we really were. He said, this is awesome to be able to sit here and talk to you like this. Through that tragedy, we actually drew a little bit closer. And I think sometimes that's a growth thing. Scar tissue is stronger than the tissue around it. That's a growth thing. I wouldn't wish a tragedy on this church for anybody, by any means. But it's easy to stagnate and not build our relationships deeper if we don't actively, intentionally try and do that. So when we look about this, we think about Christ and what he did and how our community needs to be safe. I want to take us back, and I want to look at the early church. Because in reality, guys, this community, this fellowship is not accidental. It's not incidental. It has to be an active thing. It has to be on purpose. You cannot have a close relationship with someone accidentally. You can know everybody in town. Or be like Troy, know everybody in the state. But that's not a really tight relationship with someone. And as we gather together as believers, that's what we need to be. We need to be close to each other. Acts is all about what happened after Jesus. It's all about the church. It's all about what happened. The book of Acts starts out, there's 40 days where Jesus comes back from the dead, and he spends time with them. And there are 500 people that spend time with Jesus. 500 people see him and talk to him and see these things going on. Following that, he ascends to heaven. And I'm sure, even though, and what a blessing it was that he came back, they needed him to come back and resettle things. But in the same time, when he ascends, now you get the, what now? What do we do next? Well, this is what they were doing. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and prayer. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. Keep going, Pete. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Every day they continued to meet together in the temple courts. They broke bread in their homes and ate together with glad and sincere hearts, praising God and enjoying the favor of all the people. And the Lord added to their number daily those who were being saved. So what did they actually do? I'm going to break this down in a little bit into steps. Okay? Becoming a Christian was dangerous. They just watched Jesus be crucified. Becoming a Christian was dangerous in the fact that they were going to be ostracized from their families, from their community. You want to identify with those guys, we're not going to identify with you, sort of thing. Some of you may have that going on in your own family. You may have family members that just don't want to hear it from you anymore. I love you, but don't talk about that church stuff with me. They got together every day, and it says, when we look at it, the first thing they did is they listened to the apostles' teaching. Now, that's not a sermon. Getting together and going through the Word and the sermon is great, but that's not enough. They got together and listened to each other's teaching. Everybody's insight. One of the best things you can do in this church is Sunday school. That is one of the greatest blessings you can have in this church. And those that attend that, I have no doubt, would all say that. We get into the Word, we get into a study, we look at it, we read through it individually, we come together afterwards, and we all share insights that God gave us. I'm no more an expert up here than anybody else is. There's no way I could say that. And any pastor that says that is not telling the truth. Because God speaks to everyone. And He speaks to everyone individually, and He speaks to everyone specifically. And He may tell you something that I need to hear. And our relationship has to be good enough, number one, that I listen, and number two, that you're willing to tell me what God said. Just this week, I had God on my heart said, you need to pray for this person. A friend of mine, someone who I've not seen for years, but I'm on Facebook with all the time. I don't know why. I didn't hear anything from him saying he needed prayer. God just said he needed to pray for him. How do you think it feels now when I say, God said I need to pray for you today? Don't know why. Just God said I need to pray for you today. That's an awesome feeling to know that God's talking about you to somebody else. If you don't share that with them, you're missing a blessing that's over there. But we need to be sharing with each other what God is putting on our hearts. I have gained insight and outlook from everybody in Sunday school. When we discuss these things, I hear something that, I never looked at it from that perspective before. That's not what, I read the Word and I hear things from God and I see things in there. Maybe it's something somebody else hadn't seen, but then someone else will see something I hadn't seen, and we put together a beautiful picture. It's like one of Pandy's quilts. If we did it all in one color, it'd be kind of boring. It'd just be stitching over the top of the color. But if everybody puts their piece in, boy, it turns out really neat. The second thing they talked about doing was fellowship. They spent their time together. They spent their time together in fellowship, in safety, knowing that amongst themselves they were safe. And they could share their secrets, their deepest, darkest fears. They could share all the things that made them who they were with the rest of them in fellowship. Our fellowship here at the church needs to be the same way. We need to be opening our hearts up and sharing with each other to the point where I'm not afraid. You should be able to walk in here and say, I am not afraid to share whatever I need to share. If you have a burden, that burden should be lifted off of you by everybody else in this church picking up the weight. When we're up there weightlifting, we have 3 events that we have to compete in: bench press, squats, and deadlifts. Bench press, you have a spotter. You lift that up and you're holding it over your chest. You're holding that weight over your chest, you lower it down, and you push it back. If you can't push it back, it's going to crush you. It gets to that point where it's just going to lay on top of your chest. You might be able to roll out from underneath it, kind of get out of there, but you need that person to catch it if it goes too far. The thing that we struggle with the most is squatting. And that means you put the bar across your shoulders, and you bend your knees all the way down, and then you stand back up. And we have a safety bar that catches it if it goes too far. And the other day, I went too long and too far and pushing myself. And I got down there and that safety bar caught the bar. But if somebody hadn't been able to pick me up from underneath it, I was trapped. I was squatted down into a little ball as low as I could get, and the only way out was to lift that bar off my shoulders, and I couldn't do it myself. And someone else lifted it enough that I could finish picking the weight up, we could put it away. Sharing the burden and sharing the load is part of what being a church is. When they're talking in Acts about the church, they're not talking about a building. They didn't have one. It said they met in the temple courts. They met out in the open someplace. They did not have a building. The church is not a building. The church is not a sign out front. The church is the people. We are the church. Everyone in this room is part of this church. It's not about Sunday mornings and churches, buildings. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing that we get together and we worship and we go through the Word. That is a wonderful thing. I will never naysay that. However, if the people in the church are not together in fellowship with each other, it's a pretty cold and dark place. And I think that's why so many churches today are starting to fade, and we're starting to lose churches as people age and the younger generation starts to fade away. Why? Because they have no heart investment. They have no emotional tie. They have that's where we went on Sunday when I was a kid, but they themselves have never gotten to that point where they've opened themselves up. And maybe sometimes it's our fault as older folks as we get in there and we don't open ourselves up to the younger ones too and share with the younger generation. Maybe that's part of it. But for whatever reason, that sense of fellowship is being lost in our churches. And we're seeing churches starting to fade. It's a sad thing for me to drive around Dupree and see how many empty buildings there are. Empty church buildings. There's signs out on the road for churches that don't exist. That's a sad thing. We're here today in fellowship to worship God. But we also have to make sure that we're vulnerable enough and open enough that we can share. The people in this church should be your best friends. They should be your first thought when something happens. Had a terrible situation happen this last week. A young man who I work with tried to commit suicide. I had no idea. I had no earthly idea. He's very quiet. He's he makes himself invisible. I don't have him in any classes, and there's times when I may not see him all day long. I don't know if he's there or not. I missed him in weightlifting one night, and he never misses. But I thought, well, maybe the weather was really bad. Another guy went home because he had to take his sister home, and his mom said, "You get home now, I don't want you driving in the junk." So I thought maybe that's the same situation. He's got younger siblings, maybe that's what he did. I didn't find out until the next day that 2 days before all this stuff had happened. I had no idea. And that broke my heart because I didn't know, because he didn't share it with me. And if he didn't share it with me, maybe it's because he didn't think it was safe to share it with me. And if that's the case, I missed something. And praise the Lord, I have the opportunity to go back and repair that relationship and fix that. Because it was an attempt and not a success. So I'm going to have the opportunity to go back and build that back up. But it just hit me like a brick when I heard it, because I thought, oh man, why didn't he talk to me? He could have. Why didn't he talk to me? Why didn't he get a hold of me and say, hey, can we talk? Did I not tell him that that's the relationship that I want to have? So I'm going to make that obvious, intentional connection now and say, hey, don't ever think that you're alone. Ever. You can always call me. Wherever I am, you can call me and I will be there. I would hate to have something like that happen again in my life. It was a lesson for me that I just had this week. It was a lesson for me in fellowship and in community. We're broke my heart, but God's given me a second chance. So we sit here today together. I want us to think about that fellowship too. Another thing that the early church did is they broke bread together. No, be right there. They broke bread together. That's something that we're losing in modern life too. People sit around television eating supper. Don't sit around the table anymore. Some of the greatest times that I have had with my family, whether it's my extended family, whether it's my children, Christmas. Ryan came home for a week. Sitting at the table as a family, gathered around the table with nothing else between us but the wood on the table, was the best time that we had. The times I've gone over to Jackie's house and sat down at her kitchen table, just awesome. And you can make a whole bunch of phone calls or write a whole bunch of letters, but it's not quite like sitting at the table. There's something special about that. And yet it's fading. We're pulling away from that a little bit, and that is a loss. That's a huge loss. Breaking bread together is important. It was important enough that our concept of the Last Supper comes from a time when they broke bread together, when they sat around the table. The last thing Jesus did with all his disciples gathered together was sit around the table. And he knew it was the end, and he told them, go prepare the place for us, knowing that we need to sit around the table together, because something's going to happen, and I need to talk to you guys. And he said, do this in remembrance of me. And we're going to celebrate the Lord's Supper next week, next Sunday. We just talked about that. But that community event is a representation of the closeness that we are supposed to have. When we share in the Last Supper, what we are supposed to have is that heart bond with each other as we do that, saying, this is just like Jesus sitting with his disciples. And Jesus said, this is my body. This is my blood. Do this in remembrance of me. There's a connection there that comes from that. The other thing that they did is they prayed together. Now, there's a lot to be said for that. And it's something that I think sometimes we fail to do, that we should be doing more of. Now, there's nothing wrong with our prayer list and everybody praying here in the room. That's great. That's awesome. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with praying by yourself. Even Jesus did that. He went off and spent his quiet time with God. But we also need to be praying together. Not one person, but every person. Gathering together in that group where we can all open our hearts up to God with each other and share with God. Sometimes that's where the doors open the best. One of the best experiences I had with that was with a bunch of Native American guys, a bunch of Christian guys, mostly. A couple of them weren't, but I think they felt it, in a sweat lodge. The prayers that came while we were sitting in the dark, and the individuals were talking about things that were breaking their hearts. We had one man who was really struggling with addiction. And in that particular time, in that particular moment, he felt safe enough that he could share that with everybody else in there. That was an awesome gift that I was given, to sit there and have that man open that up to me. It was awesome. It comes at strange times sometimes, but when we get together, we pray together, that is a time where we are open. If you are praying, you should be open. To be open to listen, and you're speaking to God and you're open. And that's a time where if we do that communally, if we do that together, that openness gets passed between each other as well. There was a benefit of their praying together. There was a blessing in that, and there was a need for a community to be in prayer. All these things that were done in this New Testament church were done together. Everything mentioned here was done together. They did it together as a group. There's a lesson for that, from that for us as a church. We said we should be doing these things together. If you're leaving right after church is over and not going to Sunday school, you're missing something. It's sad that what you're missing, because there's some great stuff going on in that fellowship time, in that time in Sunday school. There's some great things going on. As a pastor, I always wonder and I worry about someone who's out of here before I'm back there. I got to shut things off, all that kind of stuff up here, but it worries me sometimes when people are gone before I can go back and say hello to them. Did they not feel safe enough? Or feel enough desire to be in fellowship with the rest of us that they felt like they had to leave before it got personal? Because it's safe in the audience. Sitting out there right now, it's safe. You don't have to say a thing. You can lip sync the hymns and nobody would notice. It's all right. But that moment when we break and we have time for fellowship, that's not nearly as safe. Oh, but it's necessary. It is so necessary for us as Christians, as believers, as people who are trying to follow Jesus. It is necessary for us to have that time. Please don't let that slip away from you. To be a true follower of Jesus and truly be accepting of others and truly be connected with others and to truly have our hearts connected, there are three things necessary. We have to have faith, first off. If someone's truly a believer in God, there's no reason you should not be able to bear your soul to them. You have to have faith in that. It's not the natural state of human condition. It is not natural for us to do that. There are a lot of relationships that we have that we do not share things with. There's a lot of people that we deal with on a daily basis that we can talk about some things, but then there are other things that are just off limits. You just don't go there with this person. Well, you can go there with me. And I hope with other people in this congregation as well. You also have to have commitment. It's not easy to be in fellowship with the rest of your church. It's much easier not to. There are days when you just don't feel like coming to church. There are days when you just don't feel like listening to that person who needs you to listen. It's not about what you feel like. It's what you should do. Commitment's not easy. Commitment's hard. I watched a video yesterday of a Navy SEAL who was talking about his experiences as an individual growing up and all the things he went through. And he said his goal in life is to find something that he doesn't like to do every day and do it. Something uncomfortable and do it every day. Because when he does that, he said, I grow. If it's something I don't want to do, that's the first thing I do. So I wake up in the morning and say, boy, I hope I don't. I do it. So if I decide the day before I'm going to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and run, I get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and run. When I get up, I don't want to run. But because I don't want to run, I do it. Sharing yourself with someone is kind of like that. It's uncomfortable. It'd be easier not to. But that commitment to make that connection has to be in that same spirit. It has to be, I need this, they need this, we need to do this, I'm going to start. That's always the hard part. Who starts it? Who starts the connection? And the last thing I think that's very, very important in this is courage. Having the courage to reach out and say, man, I love you. I love you. I care about you. I want you to know that you can come to me with absolutely anything. I said this to a young lady one day because I heard it somewhere and I thought it was the greatest thing I ever heard. It's from a black preacher. And he told someone, he said, you know what? I love you and there's nothing you can do about it. I like that. I like that sentiment. You know what? Nothing on your side doesn't matter. I still love you. And eventually, when they know it's safe, maybe the next time around, maybe 6 months from then, maybe a year from then, they'll come to you and say, okay, now I really need you. And I remember when you said you cared. Will you listen to me now? You have to stay committed. It may not be an easy thing. It may not be an early thing. It may not be something that happens right away. It takes a while to build that. Be open to it. Be ready for it. Be intentional in our relationship building. You don't have to come together in this community, in this fellowship, in this church to hear a sermon. You can go online. You can buy absolutely every David Jeremiah sermon there is and stay right at home. You can download all the Christian music you can possibly imagine right now. You can sing by yourself in your kitchen, which is an awesome thing to do, but it is not the same. It is not the same. Hebrews 10, 24 and 25. The writer of Hebrews says, "Let us consider how we may spur one another on towards love and good deeds, not giving up meeting together, as some are in the habit of doing, but encouraging one another. All the more as you see the day coming." Let's not stop meeting together. Let's not stop our fellowship. Let's not back off at this point in time. Jesus is coming back. Amen. This is not the time to slack off. This is not the time for us to back off and just coast. This is a time for us to be intentional, to be seeking relationship, to be forming bonds that can't be broken. Jesus wanted that bond with us so much that he gave his life for it. He loved us so much that he gave his life so that we could have that relationship with God. And in his time on earth, he was all about relationship. With individuals, with the people that needed him most. I'm reading through Matthew right now, and he would go into a city so filled with compassion for all the people there that he would stop and heal everyone. Now I know without a doubt that not everyone he healed followed through and believed in him afterwards. There were people that were healed and walked away. But that didn't stop him from healing the next person. There were no conditions. There were no questionnaires you had to fill out first. There was no contract that had to be signed. In his compassion, he gave himself. Something he could give that nobody else could give, and that was himself. In the same way, we should be that person. Each and every one of us has something inside of you that you can give that no one else in this room can. Each and every one of us has a heart that can't be opened by anyone else. We have to do that ourselves. He gave us an example. He gave us commands about it. He gave us everything we need. We have an example from the early church and how they did it. We need to do that ourselves. Now, right now I want to talk about, next week we have our business meeting for the church. Always a fun time. I jest. Business is business, and everybody's challenged. One of the things I love about this church that we don't have, that we have in Blunt, we don't have committees. We're not really big enough to have committees, but they had committees down there. I was on the nominating committee, the committee that tried to find other people to be on other committees. That's not the most backward thing. Being put on the nominating committee is a tough thing. You got to walk around and ask people to be on other committees, but we don't really have that here. We just have fellowship time where we get together and we talk about the church. Now, when I talk about that, I cannot stress enough to you the other side of that, and that's membership in the church. In our Constitution and the Southern Baptist tradition is there's two ways to be a member of the church. You can get baptized in, or if you've already been baptized, letter of intent, you can say, I want to join this church, and the church body votes on it. I want to invite you, if you're not a member of the church, we'd love to have you. That courage, that faith, and that commitment that I talked about comes there too. That commitment that you show to Jesus Christ is all that is necessary for us to say, well, obviously you're one of us. That's all it takes. But all it takes is not always easy. I just want us to, everybody just bow your head right now. I just want us to pray for each other. I want us to pray for each other individually.